"You wouldn't believe what he's up to now," Jessica said, her voice light and teasing as she laughed across the kitchen table, holding her coffee cup with just enough tilt to let the sunlight catch the rim. I froze mid-step, my hand hovering over the stack of papers I'd been sorting, the sound of her laughter cutting sharper than any word could. Michael Harris, 42, software engineer, quietly ambitious, had just returned from a long day at the office, grease stains from fixing the old lawn mower still clinging to his hands. The house smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans and something sweet Jessica had baked that afternoon. He set down the mail, glanced at her, and forced a calm smile, the kind that keeps the room steady even when the heart races. She didn't notice the tension coiling in him, or maybe she did, and that was the point. Jessica, 39, bright eyes, always perfectly styled hair, radiated confidence that could fill the entire room. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with an ease that made every gesture deliberate, like a performance she had practiced for years. "You remember Ryan, don't you?" she continued, not waiting for an answer, her tone implying familiarity, intimacy, admiration. Michael nodded slowly, voice steady though his chest tightened. "Yes, I remember Ryan." Her grin widened, almost victorious, and she lifted her coffee cup to toast him silently, as if he could see the praise reflected only in her eyes. He took a slow breath, scanning the kitchen like it had always been his, yet today it felt foreign. The gleaming countertops, the sunlight bouncing off the polished wood floors, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Every detail seemed to sharpen the edge of her words. Michael remembered the early days, when coffee cups were shared over laughable arguments about appliances and bills, when Jessica's eyes lit up at his small victories at work, when he had thought the world was theirs. Those moments didn't fade. They layered under the surface like sediment, ready to be exposed. But today, he stayed still, letting her words land, measuring the impact silently. Her laughter didn't waver. It was the kind that bounced off the walls and lingered in the corners, lingering in the hollow spaces of his chest. He imagined the same conversation with friends, with neighbors, anyone who would listen, and the story would sound different, perfect, polished, just like Jessica. He could feel a simmering question forming, a puzzle piece missing, and the urge to uncover it clawed at him quietly. Michael moved closer to the kitchen counter, his hand brushing against a stack of letters, bills, envelopes unopened for weeks. He let his eyes drift to the living room, where family photos lined the walls, each frame a frozen moment of laughter and smiles, of birthdays and vacations, of dinners that had smelled like hope and home. And yet, the air was heavier now, weighted with the implication in Jessica's tone, a pride in someone else's accomplishments that wasn't meant to include him. The faint tick of the wall clock marked time he wanted to suspend, each second stretching as he measured her expression, the tilt of her head, the playful sparkle in her eyes that now felt sharp. He thought of the quiet hours he had devoted to work, to home, to her, and the small sacrifices made without notice. He thought of his routine, his early morning runs, the long evenings at the office coding lines of software that no one would see, the way he had quietly built stability beneath the veneer of ordinary life. Jessica set down her cup with a soft clink, leaned forward, and spoke again. "He's really doing incredible things, Michael. I mean, you should see what Ryan's achieved lately." Her words were casual, almost flippant, yet the underlying comparison stung like a shadow brushing across his chest. Michael kept his composure, nodded, and said nothing, letting the calm exterior mask the rapid calculation of next steps forming in his mind. He remembered the thrill of his first big project, the pride in seeing code compile successfully, the laughter of his colleagues when his solution worked perfectly. He had built a life quietly, without fanfare, without public acknowledgement, and now the public recognition, even in jest, of someone else by Jessica's own lips felt like a challenge issued in his living room. He walked slowly to the window, fingers tracing the sill, eyes watching sunlight dance across the lawn, and let the calm mask give way to measured determination. The heat in his chest settled into a focused clarity, the hurt transformed into resolve. He would uncover the truth, quietly, meticulously, without a word spoken yet, preparing for the moment when everything would be revealed. Each passing second heightened his awareness. The smallest creak in the floorboard, the faint hum of distant traffic, the way the coffee steam curled in the morning light. This was the calm before the storm, the silent prelude to revelation. Michael breathed steadily, counted to 10 in his mind, and let the weight of the house settle around him, as if absorbing the tension. He reminded himself that power lay not in words shouted but in actions measured, in truth revealed when the time was right. Jessica continued to talk, unaware that every casual comment, every lifted eyebrow, every slight smile was being catalogued in his mind, ready for the day the veil would lift, ready for the moment justice and clarity would be served. He felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the story was not yet over, that the hidden truths would soon emerge, that the careful patience of his observation would yield the clarity he sought. And in that silence, punctuated only by the soft ticking of the clock and the muted sound of morning traffic, Michael prepared himself, mentally rehearsing the steps to uncover what lay beneath the cheerful facade, what truths had been concealed, and what revelations awaited, knowing that the calm patience now would set the stage for the undeniable exposure of reality when the time was finally right. Michael moved to the living room, letting the soft morning light filter through the blinds, illuminating the shelves lined with books he had collected over the years, each one a testament to late nights spent learning, growing, quietly shaping the life he had built. He sank into the armchair, the leather cool under his fingers, and allowed himself a moment to observe, to breathe, to listen to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of birds outside. The house was calm now, the residual echo of Jessica's laughter fading like a cloud dissipating in the sun, leaving an almost tangible emptiness behind. He could feel the subtle tension in the air, the way it lingered around corners, pressed into the carpet fibers, folded into the corners of the room where shadows pooled. Every familiar object now seemed to carry a weight, a meaning layered with the unspoken knowledge of her words. He opened his laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard, contemplating how best to track what he had begun to notice over the past few weeks. Calendar entries, social media interactions, the casual slips in conversation that now made sense in a way they had not before. All these details demanded attention. He started with the calendar, scanning for appointments that did not match her usual patterns, small blocks of time labeled vaguely, the handwriting neat but impersonal, like a message sent to himself rather than a note shared with a partner. Each anomaly tightened the knot in his chest, not with anger yet, but with a sharp awareness that the surface of their life had cracks he had not seen. He noted each irregularity, jotting it down on a pad beside him, tracing connections between them as one would follow the threads of a map, looking for paths that led somewhere significant. Michael remembered the countless evenings he had spent preparing dinners, fixing broken fixtures, helping with work projects, and maintaining the rhythm of a home he believed to be shared equally. The thought that there were layers hidden beneath, that Jessica might have been performing a version of herself for years, pressed heavily against his sense of normalcy. He recalled past conversations, the offhand remarks about friends, colleagues, people from her past, that had seemed trivial at the time, now taking on the texture of foreshadowing, subtle markers pointing to truths that had remained invisible until now. The quiet made his mind sharper, and he moved next to the messages he had kept aside, emails and texts that seemed ordinary but were now ripe for re-examination. His eyes traced the names, the timestamps, the tone that at first appeared casual but now resonated, with undertones of comparison and admiration for someone outside of their shared life. Each scroll of the screen revealed patterns, little signals tucked between the lines, the kind of evidence that would go unnoticed by someone less attentive. The more he observed, the more the puzzle assembled itself, not with a sense of alarm, but with a controlled precision, as if watching pieces fall into place in a long-forgotten jigsaw. Michael paused to close his eyes for a brief moment, imagining the scene in the kitchen, Jessica smiling, the casual pride in her words, and he felt the calm beneath his calm, a steady resolve forming. It was not about confrontation yet, nor about accusation. It was about understanding, cataloging, preparing. The narrative of their life, the story he had believed to be shared, needed a foundation rebuilt on awareness, on meticulous observation, before it could be addressed. He rose, moving to the window, looking out over the lawn where dew still clung to the grass, glistening in the early sunlight. Each blade reflected a detail, a subtle shimmer of truth waiting to be noticed. He allowed himself a breath, letting the rhythm of the house, the quiet tick of the clock, the muted traffic outside, anchor him. He would act with patience, with foresight, ensuring that when the time came, his actions would reveal the truth with clarity, leaving no doubt about what had been hidden, no room for misinterpretation. The morning continued, soft and measured, each moment an opportunity to observe, to record, to understand. As Michael moved through his home with deliberate steps, the weight of knowledge and anticipation settling into a careful, unyielding focus that would guide him in the unfolding hours ahead. Michael decided to move to the study, a small room at the back of the house lined with bookshelves and personal mementos from his career, each shelf a silent chronicle of his quiet achievements. He closed the door softly behind him, the click of the latch punctuating the transition from casual mourning to focused observation. Sitting at his desk, he let his gaze fall on the organized stacks of papers, the neat arrangement of pens and notebooks, and the laptop waiting like a sentinel for him to begin. He opened the laptop slowly, fingers poised over the keyboard, yet not rushing. This was about precision, not speed. Michael began systematically reviewing recent emails and text messages, noting patterns that previously seemed insignificant, each one now carrying potential meaning. The timestamps, the subtle wording, the frequency of messages all painted a picture he had not seen before. He jotted notes onto a legal pad, the handwriting careful, deliberate, mapping connections like plotting coordinates on a map, each line drawing closer to a clear understanding of the events unfolding around him. He paused to remember the early days with Jessica, the mornings they had spent drinking coffee together while planning small projects, the evenings arranging furniture or sorting through bills, moments of partnership that had felt ordinary then but now seemed layered with irony. He observed how those ordinary moments had masked the underlying dynamics, the tiny cracks in communication, the understated shifts in attitude, all now making sense with the perspective he had gained. The sunlight streamed through the window, catching on the pages of the legal pad and glinting on the screen, a reminder that clarity often comes slowly, illuminated gradually rather than all at once. Michael allowed himself to notice the faint ticking of the wall clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional distant sound of a car on the street, integrating these ordinary background rhythms into his awareness to maintain a sense of groundedness amidst the mental focus. Each message, each pattern, revealed subtle cues about Jessica's pride in Ryan, the admiration she had conveyed indirectly, the choice of words and expressions that hinted at her internal comparison. Michael cataloged each element carefully, knowing that these details, seemingly minor, would become crucial when the time came to reveal the truth. He thought about the concept of patience, the necessity of observation before action, and the value of maintaining composure while gathering information, the discipline of strategic foresight over reactive emotion. The patterns emerged, subtle at first, then more defined, highlighting moments when Jessica's interactions hinted at outside influence, comparisons, or pride in someone else's accomplishments. Michael traced these back, reconstructing timelines, noting moments that previously felt insignificant but now contributed to a larger narrative. His awareness deepened with each observation, a controlled vigilance, the quiet intensity of a mind preparing for a critical reveal. He moved from the laptop to a file drawer, pulling out folders containing previous correspondences, receipts, and reminders, reviewing them in sequence to detect discrepancies and inconsistencies, the foundation for understanding the hidden truths. He traced these threads, one after another, constructing a mental map of events and intentions, careful to maintain objectivity and clarity. The room remained quiet, the only sounds the occasional turning of a page or the soft scratching of pen on paper, reinforcing the deliberate pace of his investigation. Michael felt the weight of this preparation, the balance between anticipation and restraint, knowing that each detail examined, each pattern recognized, strengthened the eventual clarity of the story he would expose. He leaned back in his chair briefly, letting the steady rhythm of his own breathing provide focus and calm, reinforcing his readiness for the controlled execution of what he had observed. With a deep breath, he returned to the laptop, cross-referencing information, mentally rehearsing the sequence of revelations, ensuring that when he stepped into the next phase, each action would be deliberate, each observation accounted for, and the truth would emerge without ambiguity, measured and undeniable. By late afternoon, the house had settled into the kind of quiet that usually meant peace, but to Michael it felt more like a held breath. The study door stood halfway open, and the hallway beyond it glowed with the warm gold of a lowering sun. He had spent hours piecing together small facts, not enough to accuse, not enough to condemn, but enough to make every ordinary sound feel loaded. The soft click of Jessica's heels in the entryway reached him before her voice did. She had come home earlier than usual, carrying the scent of fresh air and expensive perfume, her purse hooked over one shoulder, her phone resting face down in her palm like something she did not want the room to see. Michael looked up from the desk, his expression neutral, the legal pad already tucked beneath a folder. "Long day?" he asked. His voice sounded calm, even to him, almost too calm, like still water over a deep current. Jessica paused near the kitchen archway, smiled without warmth, and said, "Not really. Just had a lot to handle." That was the kind of answer people give when they want to sound open while closing every door. He nodded and stood slowly, feeling the faint stiffness in his back from sitting too long. The house around them looked perfect, the polished floors, the clean counters, the framed vacation photos, the comfortable evidence of a life built over years. But perfection had started to feel like wallpaper over cracks. Jessica set her purse on the island and tapped her phone screen once, just enough to wake it, not enough to reveal anything. Michael saw the motion and filed it away without letting his eyes linger. She moved toward the refrigerator, opened it, stared inside, then closed it without taking anything. Nervous movement. Unfinished thought. A woman performing normal life, but missing the rhythm. He had seen software fail that way before, a system still running while something underneath corrupted one line at a time. "I was thinking," she said suddenly, turning back toward him, "we should go out Friday night. Maybe somewhere nice." Michael studied her face for half a second. There it was, the smoothing over, the polished gesture, the attempt to return the stage to familiar lighting. "Sure," he said. "Where did you have in mind?" Her answer came too quickly. "Maybe Oak and Stone. Ryan said their new menu is amazing." The name landed in the kitchen like a glass set down too hard. Michael did not blink. He only reached for a towel and wiped an imaginary spot on the counter. Oak and Stone was 20 miles away in downtown Columbus, the kind of place with valet parking, dim lights, and steaks that cost more than a week of. Groceries used to cost when they were younger. He had never taken Jessica there. He knew that. She knew that too. "Ryan told you that?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, too casually, turning away again. "He goes there sometimes with clients." Michael folded the towel once, then again, careful with his hands because careful hands kept a man from giving away what his mind was doing. Must be doing well. Jessica gave a small laugh, and that laugh was different from the one in the morning. It was softer, almost proud. He always had that drive, even back in college. Some people just know how to make things happen. The room tilted, not physically, not in any way anyone else could see, but inside Michael something shifted into place. It was not jealousy that moved through him first. It was recognition. He recognized the tone of a person comparing histories, comparing choices, comparing the man in front of her to a version of life she had kept polished in memory. He remembered Jessica at 24, sitting beside him in a used Honda Civic outside a rental duplex, eating burgers from a paper bag, and telling him she did not need fancy things as long as they kept choosing each other. He remembered believing her. He remembered working weekends, saving for the down payment, learning new programming languages after midnight, because stability did not appear by accident. It had to be built, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, quiet sacrifice by quiet sacrifice. Now she stood in their kitchen, in the house those sacrifices helped create, praising another man as if Michael was merely furniture that happened to be nearby. "Some people do," he said. Jessica looked at him then, maybe expecting irritation, maybe hoping for it. But he gave her nothing except calm. That seemed to bother her more than anger would have. She narrowed her eyes slightly and said, "You do not have to be weird about it." The words were small, but they carried a familiar weight, the kind of sentence meant to make a man question his own reaction before he had one. Michael almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because he heard the mechanism now. Dismiss, minimize, redirect. He had spent the day studying patterns, and now one was unfolding in real time across the kitchen island. I am not being weird, he said. I am listening. That made her pause. For one brief second, the confident shape of her face changed. The smile slipped, not far, just enough for him to see the caution beneath it. Then her phone lit up on the counter. Neither of them moved. The screen faced down, so no name appeared. Only a pale glow spreading around the edges like light under a closed door. Jessica reached for it a little too fast, turned it over against her chest, and said, "It is work." Michael nodded once. Of course. He did not challenge her. He did not ask to see it. He did not raise his voice or step closer. He simply watched the choice she made and placed it beside the others in his mind. The vague calendar blocks. The careful answers. The repeated name. The pride. The defensiveness. The phone held like a secret. Outside, a neighbor's lawn mower started up, low and steady, rolling across the suburban street like a reminder that the world continued its ordinary schedule even when one man's marriage was beginning to reveal its hidden architecture. Jessica slipped the phone into her back pocket and busied herself with a cabinet, pulling out a glass, filling it with water, drinking only half. Michael leaned against the counter and let the silence stretch. People fear silence because it asks questions they cannot control. Jessica finally set the glass down and said, "I do not know why you are acting like this." There it was again, the invitation to defend himself. He let it pass by? Like what, he asked. She looked toward the hallway, then back at him. Distant. Michael absorbed the word. Distant. After years of coming home to half conversations and distracted smiles, after mornings where her phone got more attention than his voice, after hearing another man praised in the room he helped pay for, now distance had become his crime. He felt the hurt rise, old and familiar, but he did not let it steer. "Maybe I am just noticing things," he said. Jessica's face tightened. "What is that supposed to mean?" He straightened, picked up the stack of mail from the counter, and tapped it into a neat square. Nothing yet. 2 words. Quiet. Clean. Enough to make the air change. She stared at him, searching his face for the accusation he had not given her. But Michael had learned something important that day. Truth did not need to rush. Truth could sit in a room, silent and patient, while lies used up all their breath. He walked past her toward the study, the mail in his hand, his steps even on the hardwood. Behind him, Jessica said his name, but he did not turn right away. He paused at the hallway entrance, feeling the last light of evening across his shoulder, and answered without looking back. "Friday sounds fine." Then he stepped into the study and closed the door, not loudly, not dramatically, just firmly enough for the click to tell him that the next stage had begun. Michael sat at the study desk, the afternoon light fading into a gentle amber that spilled across the floor and touched the spines of his neatly aligned books, casting long, quiet shadows. He reached for his notebook, the one he had been using to catalog subtle irregularities and inconsistencies over the past few weeks, and flipped to a blank page, running his pen across it slowly, as if coaxing clarity into form. Each word he wrote down, each observation logged, was deliberate, measured, a quiet rehearsal of the story he would one day reveal. He remembered the small gestures of Jessica earlier, the tilt of her head, the controlled laugh, the subtle pride in her voice when speaking of Ryan. And he allowed each memory to settle in his mind, not as fuel for confrontation, but as evidence to frame understanding. He looked at the laptop, opened the recent emails again, letting his eyes scan the headers, the senders, the timestamps, each line revealing incremental patterns that pointed toward the same conclusion, the same carefully hidden narrative he had sensed all along. Michael traced connections, moving from one email to another, noting when the timing of messages coincided with gaps in their shared schedule, when phrases or exclamations mirrored those he had heard her use about Ryan in casual conversation, and when small, seemingly innocent remarks carried echoes of comparison or admiration. His breathing remained steady, the controlled rhythm keeping the mind sharp, the observations precise. Outside the window, a neighbor's dog barked briefly, the sound sharp against the calm evening, and Michael let it pass, noting the simplicity of the world continuing, unaware, while complex threads unfolded inside his home. He reviewed the notes he had made, organizing them into categories, each anomaly paired with context, each small indication of pride or alignment toward another person highlighted without judgment, simply facts waiting for the clarity of understanding. He paused, letting his gaze wander over the living room from the doorway, the polished hardwood, the neatly arranged furniture, the family photographs, all visual records of effort, time, and shared life, and realized the contrast between physical order and emotional complexity that had quietly built underneath. Michael traced the sequence of ordinary interactions, the polite smiles, the casual remarks, the apparent attention to domestic routines, juxtaposed with private acknowledgments of another individual, and he began to see the architecture of a hidden emphasis, the unseen weight placed on someone outside the family unit. He organized these patterns mentally, preparing for a time when observation would transform into clarity, when patience would reveal the hidden dynamics with precision. The faint ticking of the clock, the soft hum of air through vents, the distant sounds of the street, all created a background rhythm against which his focus sharpened. Michael reflected on the discipline of listening and watching without immediate reaction, the way insight grows quietly when measured against context, history, and evidence. He allowed the details to settle, aligning each observation with the next, tracing cause and effect through gestures, words, and unspoken implications. The sun continued its descent, the light shifting to cooler tones that softened edges and altered perception, a subtle reminder that time moved forward regardless of preparation. Michael leaned back in his chair, letting the awareness of accumulated knowledge settle into a calm readiness. Every carefully noted inconsistency, every subtle pride expressed in casual conversation, every indication of comparison or admiration had been cataloged, considered, and weighed. He felt the quiet satisfaction that comes from methodical understanding, the kind of mental clarity that precedes decisive action. The room around him remained still, the house quiet except for the low hum of appliances and the gentle rustle of leaves outside the window. Michael picked up the notebook once more, reviewing the notes line by line, mentally rehearsing the sequence of revelations he would one day unfold, ensuring that when the moment arrived, every action would be deliberate, every observation accounted for, and every hidden detail brought to light in a way that could not be dismissed. He breathed steadily, feeling the measured rhythm of his thoughts align with the calm of the evening, knowing that preparation and awareness would transform into clarity when the time was right. Each page turned, each note reviewed, strengthened his understanding, reinforced his control over the situation, and prepared him for the quiet yet undeniable exposure of the hidden truths that had been accumulating under the surface of ordinary life. Michael closed the laptop slowly, fingers resting lightly on the keyboard, and exhaled, letting the weight of observation, anticipation, and preparation settle as he gazed out the window, fully aware that clarity, patience, and the careful alignment of facts were his greatest tools in the unfolding hours ahead. Friday arrived with a gray sky over Columbus and a cold wind that moved through the neighborhood like it knew something was coming. Michael worked from home that morning, though very little of his mind stayed on the code glowing across his monitor. Lines of software blurred into shapes, numbers became static, and every few minutes his eyes drifted toward the hallway where Jessica had disappeared into the bedroom to get ready for their dinner. The plan had been hers, at least on the surface. Oak and Stone at 7:30. Downtown. Valet parking. A place Ryan had recommended. Michael had agreed because sometimes the easiest way to see the truth is to stop resisting the direction someone else is pulling you. He finished his last meeting at 4, closed his laptop, and sat still for a moment in the study. The notebook was in the locked drawer. The copied emails were saved in a private folder. The calendar screenshots were backed up twice. None of it was explosive by itself, but together it formed a shape he could no longer ignore. He was not walking into dinner empty-handed. He was walking in with patience, and patience had become sharper than anger. By 6:15, Jessica stepped into the kitchen wearing a navy dress and a pearl necklace he had bought her on their 10th anniversary. For a second, memory hit him before suspicion could. He saw her younger, laughing in a cramped apartment while rain tapped against a window air conditioner. He saw her barefoot in the first house they rented, holding a paint roller, leaving a blue streak across his old t-shirt. He saw the woman he married before distance learned how to wear her face. Then she checked her phone, smiled at something on the screen, and the memory folded itself away. "Ready?" she asked. Michael looked at her, then at the phone in her hand. Almost. He went upstairs, changed into a dark sport coat, and stood before the mirror long enough to study his own face. He looked tired, but not broken. That mattered. A man can lose sleep and still keep his center. A man can feel the floor shifting and still choose where to place his feet. Downstairs, Jessica was waiting by the door, tapping one heel against the floor. The rhythm was impatient, quick, almost nervous. During the drive downtown, she filled the silence with weather, traffic, and a story about a co-worker who had parked in the wrong garage. Michael answered when needed, but mostly he listened. Streetlights flickered on as they moved along Interstate 670, the city rising ahead in glass and steel. Rain began to mist against the windshield, light enough that the wipers only swept every few seconds, each pass clearing the view before the blur returned. Jessica turned her phone face down in her lap, then face up, then face down again. Michael noticed, but said nothing. At Oak and Stone, the valet opened her door before Michael could. The restaurant was all warm lighting, dark wood, low conversations, and expensive confidence. A hostess with a practiced smile led them to a table near the back, close enough to the bar to hear laughter, but far enough to pretend privacy. Jessica seemed pleased. Too pleased. Her eyes moved across the room, not like a woman seeing a place for the first time, but like someone checking whether a familiar scene had been arranged correctly. Michael unfolded his napkin and placed it across his lap. "You have been here before," he said. Jessica looked up from the menu. "What? You knew where the bar was before the hostess turned." Her smile came late. "I might have seen pictures online." Michael nodded. "Of course." The waiter arrived, offered water, listed specials, and vanished. Jessica leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You are doing it again." "Doing what?" "That thing where you act calm, but make everything uncomfortable." Michael let the sentence sit between them. It was almost elegant in its unfairness, blaming the smoke for the fire. He looked around the room, at the couples talking, the business dinners unfolding, the bartender polishing glasses under amber light. Then his eyes returned to her. "I am not trying to make anything uncomfortable." She gave a small laugh, brittle at the edges. "Then maybe try harder." There was a time that line would have made him apologize. He would have reached across the table, softened his voice, taken responsibility for a tension he had not created just to keep peace from leaving the room. But peace bought that way is not peace. It is rent paid on silence. Michael took a sip of water and said, "Ryan comes here often with clients, right?" Jessica looked down at her menu too fast. "I told you that." "You did. So why ask?" "Because I am curious." Her fingers tightened around the menu. "About what?" Before he could answer, a man's voice came from behind Michael, smooth and familiar in the way of someone who expects recognition. "Jessica." She looked up, and for one unguarded second, her face changed completely. Not surprise. Not polite recognition. Relief. Michael turned slowly. Ryan Collins stood beside the table. In a charcoal suit, smiling like he had stepped into a scene written for him. He was tall, polished, silver beginning at the temples, with the kind of confidence men wear when people have been forgiving their arrogance for years. "What are the odds?" Ryan said. Michael stood and extended his hand. "Ryan, good to finally see you again." Ryan shook it, his grip firm, his smile still aimed mostly at Jessica. "Michael Harris. It has been a while." The way he said it carried something faintly dismissive, a soft little pat on the shoulder without touching him. Jessica recovered quickly, too quickly, and gestured toward the empty chair. "We were just having dinner." Ryan glanced at the chair, then at Michael. "I should not interrupt." He was already interrupting. Michael smiled. "No problem at all. Join us for a minute." Jessica's eyes snapped to him. There it was again, that flicker of caution. Ryan hesitated, but pride made the decision for him. He pulled out the chair and sat down. The triangle completed itself under the low restaurant lights, and Michael felt the strange calm of a man watching a door finally open. Ryan ordered a club soda without looking at the menu. The waiter did not ask for clarification. Another small fact. Another quiet click in the lock. Jessica laughed too brightly at something Ryan said about downtown construction, and Michael listened to the rhythm between them, the timing, the ease, the shared references disguised as coincidence. 5 minutes became 10. 10 became a pattern. Then Ryan leaned back, smiled at Michael, and said, Jessica tells me you work in software. Pretty stable field. Safe choice. Safe choice. The phrase slid across the table wearing a friendly suit. Jessica looked at her water glass, but she smiled. Michael felt the old sting rise, then settle. It has treated me well, he said. Ryan nodded. That is good. Some people are built for steady. Others need a bigger stage. Jessica finally looked up, and the pride in her eyes was not subtle anymore. Michael folded his hands on the table. He understood then that the exposure would not begin with a raised voice or a dramatic accusation. It would begin exactly here in a restaurant Ryan knew too well. With Jessica wearing pearls from a marriage she was quietly disrespecting, and a man across the table who thought Michael was only steady, only safe, only small. Michael smiled, calm as closing a file. Funny you mention stages, he said, because I have been learning a lot about who performs on them. Ryan's smile did not disappear, but it changed shape. It tightened at the corners, the way a man's confidence tightens when a simple conversation steps too close to something private. Jessica noticed it too. Michael saw her fingers move toward the stem of her water glass, then stop halfway, as if she suddenly remembered every gesture had meaning. The restaurant carried on around them, forks tapping plates, low laughter rolling beneath the amber lights, a waiter moving past with a tray balanced on one hand. Ordinary life kept performing its little routines, but at their table the air had gone still. Ryan leaned back and gave a short, polished laugh. That sounds serious. Michael kept his eyes on him. Not serious. Interesting. Jessica cleared her throat. Michael has been in one of his moods all week. There it was, the familiar attempt to label the room before anyone else could understand it. A mood. A phase. A husband being difficult. Michael looked at her, and for a second, he almost felt sorry for the woman she used to be, the woman who would have recognized the damage in that sentence. I have been paying attention, he said. That is different. Ryan glanced between them, still smiling, but now his hand had wrapped around his club soda with too much force. The bubbles climbed the glass and vanished at the surface. Well, attention can be a dangerous thing if it turns into assumption. Michael nodded once. Agreed. That is why I prefer documentation. Jessica's face went pale in the softest way, not dramatic, not theatrical, just enough for the light to reveal the blood leaving her confidence. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Documentation of what? Michael did not answer right away. He reached into the inside pocket of his sport coat and took out his phone. He did not place it on the table yet. He simply held it, black screen against his palm, calm as a judge before reading a verdict. Before we get there, he said, I want to ask something simple. Jessica's voice dropped. Do not do this here. Michael turned to her. Do what here? She swallowed. Whatever this is. This is dinner at a restaurant you suggested because Ryan praised it. This is Ryan appearing by coincidence at a table he knew how to find. This is a conversation about stages, choices, and what people think they can perform without being seen. Ryan gave another laugh, but this one had no warmth in it. You are reaching. Michael looked at him. Maybe. Then he tapped his phone awake and turned the screen slightly, not enough for nearby tables, only enough for the three of them. On it was a calendar entry from Jessica's shared account, one she had forgotten still synced to an old family tablet Michael kept in the study. The title was vague, just client review, but the location matched oak and stone. Last month. The month before. 3 times total. All on evenings Jessica had described as late meetings. Jessica's eyes locked on the screen. Her lips parted, but no words came. Ryan looked once, then away, pretending not to recognize his own shadow in the room. Michael swiped to the next image. A receipt from the restaurant loyalty account, tied to Jessica's email because years ago she had used the same address for coupons, groceries, and half their life. 2 dinners. Same dates. Same table area. One of the receipts had Ryan's name attached through a reservation confirmation forwarded by mistake to an old inbox Jessica no longer monitored. Small mistake. Tiny crack. Enough light to enter. That does not prove anything, Jessica said. Her voice was thin now, careful. I had dinner with an old friend. Michael felt the sentence touch something inside him and break against it. Then why lie? The question was quiet. That made it worse. Ryan shifted in his chair. People avoid unnecessary arguments. Michael turned to him slowly. Is that what you call it? Ryan's jaw tightened. I call it none of your business between 2 adults catching up. The words came out too easily, too entitled, and Michael saw Jessica flinch because even she understood he had overplayed his hand. Michael placed the phone face down on the table. My marriage is my business. Silence landed so cleanly that even the noise of the restaurant seemed to move farther away. Jessica looked at Michael with something approaching anger, but underneath it was fear, the fear of a person realizing the version of events they prepared was not the only one in the room. You went through my things, she said. Michael shook his head. No. I went through our shared accounts, our shared calendars, and old household records that still came to devices I paid for and maintained. I did not need to break into anything. You left the truth sitting in plain sight because you thought I had stopped looking. That hit harder than an accusation. Jessica's eyes shone, not with tears yet, but with the pressure of being cornered by facts. Ryan leaned forward, lowering his voice. You need to calm down. Michael looked at him with a stillness that made the words fall flat. I am calm. He was. That was the strange part. The hurt was still there, somewhere beneath the ribs, but it had stopped thrashing. It had become structure. You sat at my table tonight and suggested I was safe and steady like those were small things. I used to think steady meant boring too, until I realized steady is what keeps a roof over a family, keeps accounts paid, keeps promises alive when nobody is applauding. Jessica looked down at her pearl necklace, and Michael saw her fingers brush it lightly, remembering perhaps when he had given it to her across a hotel balcony in Nashville, both of them laughing because the trip had been all they could afford that year and still somehow felt like luxury. The memory passed through his face but did not weaken him. Michael, she said softly, using a tone she had not used in months. He did not let it pull him backward. Not yet. Ryan stood halfway, smoothing his jacket. I think I should go. Michael looked up at him. You should. But before you do, you should know something. Ryan paused. Jessica whispered, Michael, please. He opened another file on his phone and turned it toward Ryan. It was not a private message. It was a public business filing from the county database, matched with court records and a small claims case Michael had found during one of his searches after Ryan's name appeared too often to ignore. The image showed a judgment from 2 years earlier, a failed investment dispute, unpaid debt, and a suspended consulting license in another state. Nothing scandalous in a cheap way. Nothing dramatic enough for shouting. Just the truth, plain and humiliating in its simplicity. Ryan was not the success story Jessica had been admiring. He was a man wearing borrowed shine over old paperwork. You might want to be careful, Michael said. Some stages collapse when the lighting gets better. Ryan stared at the screen, and for the first time that night, he had no clever answer. Jessica looked from the phone to Ryan, and Michael watched the admiration drain from her face, slow and visible, like water leaving a cracked glass. The truth had not finished with her yet. It had only begun. Jessica sat back in her chair, the weight of the evening pressing down on her like a soft, inescapable fog. She did not speak at first, only turning her hands over in her lap, fingers tracing the smooth pearl necklace Michael had given her so many years ago. The restaurant around them continued as usual, forks scraping plates, soft laughter, the clink of glasses, but at their table, time had narrowed to a sharp, clear point. Michael leaned slightly forward, hands resting lightly on the table, his posture calm, deliberate, the kind of control that did not need to shout to be noticed. He had already cataloged the calendar entries, the receipts, the repeated patterns, and now he watched the subtle shifts in Jessica's expressions, noting them with the same attention he had once given to lines of code that refused to compile. Ryan shifted in his seat, glancing at his watch, his casual confidence waning under the quiet but undeniable weight of evidence before him. Michael's voice remained steady, even, and for every word he spoke, the impact seemed to echo louder than the voice itself. I think it is clear, he said, that some of the stories you have shared about the past few months do not match the facts we have in front of us. Jessica's lips parted slightly, eyes widening, searching for an escape or a justification, but she found neither. Ryan's face betrayed a flicker of concern, subtle, almost imperceptible, the kind of change that only someone truly paying attention could detect. Michael held the moment, letting silence carry the weight, allowing the observations, the records, the inconsistencies to speak louder than accusations. Jessica's hand moved to her glass again, swirling the water slowly, the movement restless but controlled. I can explain, she said finally, her voice tight, careful. Michael nodded, keeping his tone neutral. I am listening. The pause that followed allowed the tension to stretch and contract like a held breath. He did not interrupt. He allowed her to choose her own words, to reveal the gaps she had left unguarded. The flicker of her expression, the slight hesitation before each phrase, provided more clarity than any argument might have. Ryan's presence, previously a cushion of familiarity, had become a mirror showing the cracks of stories long polished. Michael's mind cataloged each syllable, each slight inflection, each careful avoidance. It was not immediate judgment he sought, but understanding, awareness, and preparation for the next step. The soft hum of the restaurant, the distant clatter of cutlery, and the muted conversation of other diners became a background score, emphasizing the quiet intensity at their table. Michael's eyes traced Jessica's movements, small and deliberate, the way her fingers brushed the edge of the table, the slight twitch in her shoulders, and he noted them as data points, silent markers of stress and recognition. It is difficult to align perception and reality sometimes, Michael said, especially when stories are retold in ways that suit memory or desire. Jessica's breath caught. Ryan leaned slightly forward, curiosity and concern mingling in his posture, yet he remained quiet, sensing that the conversation had moved beyond casual dinner banter. Michael continued, his voice measured. Tonight, everything is visible. The calendar, the receipts, the records, all are pieces of a puzzle that, once assembled, leave little room for interpretation. Jessica's eyes shifted to Ryan briefly, and then back to Michael. She was quiet now. The chatter of confidence dissolved into the hum of anxiety. Michael's hands remained lightly clasped on the table, the calmness of his posture contrasting with the subtle tension radiating from the other two. Understanding is better than assumption, he said, leaning back slightly, the statement simple, neutral, but carrying the weight of observation and preparation. Jessica's fingers tightened around the stem of her water glass, and Ryan's hand twitched slightly as he processed the quiet authority Michael projected. The moment stretched, elongated, and in that space, the quiet exposure of truths unfolded without confrontation, without dramatics, each person at the table feeling the clarity that comes when hidden details are recognized and the narrative is understood. The air carried the tension of revelation, subtle yet undeniable, as Michael maintained his controlled presence, ensuring that every detail, every observation, and every carefully gathered piece of truth would be acknowledged and understood without haste, without distraction, only with the precise weight of deliberate patience. Michael felt the tension in the room ease slightly, not because the situation had changed, but because clarity had begun to settle over the table like a quiet morning mist. Jessica's shoulders relaxed fractionally, her fingers slowly releasing the stem of her water glass, and for the first time that evening, her gaze lingered on Michael without the usual flicker of pride or deflection. Ryan shifted in his seat again, the confidence that had seemed effortless all night now slightly subdued, as if the truth carried its own gravity that could not be denied. Michael placed his hands lightly on the table, interlacing his fingers and letting his calm presence anchor the moment, demonstrating that control and observation could speak louder than any accusation. He reflected on the months of careful attention, cataloging anomalies, following patterns, and tracing inconsistencies that had gone unnoticed in the rush of daily life, understanding. Finally, that patience had prepared him for this precise moment. Outside, the faint sound of distant traffic, the occasional footsteps in the sidewalk, the low murmur of other diners, all reinforced the normalcy that contrasted sharply with the intensity at their own table, emphasizing the quiet power of truth revealed calmly. He spoke slowly, each word chosen deliberately. We have lived together long enough to know the patterns of each other's days, the rhythms that define our routines, and the choices that shape our shared life. What has become visible tonight is simply what exists in plain sight when one takes the time to notice. Jessica's eyes flicked to Ryan briefly, then back to him, a subtle acknowledgement of the recognition she had avoided, the acknowledgement of what was already known but unspoken. Michael continued, attention to detail is not judgment, it is understanding. Recognition of facts is not accusation, it is preparation for clarity. The discrepancies we have encountered are not accusations, they are observations. Observations that allow us to navigate the truth of our shared history and current reality. The weight of the words settled over the table, each one precise and unyielding, a calm force that left no room for misinterpretation or evasion. Jessica's fingers moved to her lap, her gaze falling to the tablecloth, the faint reflection of the restaurant lights dancing in her eyes as she absorbed the implications without responding. Ryan's presence, which had initially introduced a ripple of confidence and performative energy, now served as a contrast to Michael's steady demeanor, revealing the subtleties of credibility, the fragility of borrowed polish against the enduring foundation of patience and observation. Michael looked out the window for a moment, the evening light casting long shadows across the street, and allowed himself a measured breath, internalizing the calm after months of anticipation, the clarity that patience had yielded. He turned back to the table, speaking with a tone that neither demanded nor provoked, only illuminated. The facts, when laid out carefully, leave no question about their context or meaning. They speak for themselves. That is why we must rely on observation, understanding, and timing rather than assumption, impression, or hastily drawn conclusions. Jessica raised her eyes slowly, acknowledging for herself the accuracy of the statement, the quiet moral authority behind it, a recognition that the careful compilation of evidence and attention to nuance could not be ignored. Ryan's expression softened fractionally, a hint of reluctant respect for the process unfolding in front of him, and he leaned back, no longer attempting to assert control over the narrative that Michael had quietly established. Michael allowed a final moment of silence to stretch between them, letting the calm weight of observation, the precise articulation of facts, and the patient accumulation of understanding settle fully. He then nodded slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture signaling that the stage was set, that the revelation had been achieved, and that the quiet power of meticulous preparation and steady composure had brought the evening to a point where truth could exist unchallenged. The restaurant noises continued around them, indifferent and ordinary, but at their table, everything had changed. The balance had shifted subtly, the lines of control redrawn by calm authority and deliberate attention, and Michael felt the satisfaction of knowing that the truths hidden for so long had now been seen, acknowledged, and understood with clarity that required neither theatrics nor confrontation, only the patient precision that had guided him to this moment.